Hello friends, in this video we will talk about what is PyTorch and TensorFlow and what is the difference between them. We will look what are these frameworks, what is the use of these frameworks, and then we'll see the difference and which one is better. So you might have heard about these terms PyTorch and TensorFlow. In short, TensorFlow is also represented TF. So these are the machine learning frameworks. These are used to create deep learning architecture models. As you know, in deep learning, there are neurons. There are some input neurons, and then there are some middle layers of neurons, right? And these middle layer can have any number of middle layers, and at the end we have output. And these neurons are connected, right? This whole network is connected. So these network has to be coded, right? Now through TensorFlow and PyTorch, we can build these networks. We can add different layers from the input layer to some middle layers. So let's say convolution layers, and then at the end we have the output layer, and there are some softmax function can be used, activation functions, right? So this whole architecture can be written using PyTorch and TensorFlow. And TensorFlow is created by Google, and whereas PyTorch is created by Facebook, Meta. Both are open source, and you can create your deep learning model using these, and then train on some data. Now, what is the difference between these two frameworks? The difference lies in how they compute and train the model. So there are two types of training that can happen. One is through the static graph and other is dynamic. Now if you want to visualize these networks, these can be considered as directed acyclic graph, right? Now in this directed acyclic graph, first in static approach, what happens? First the network has to be defined, and after that computation will start with the given input. Whereas in dynamic graphs, what happens? The computation will start on the go. So it is like similar difference between the compiled languages and interpreted languages. Compiled languages like C++, Java, their code first compile and then later on it runs. Whereas interpreted language like JavaScript or Python, they take each statement of your code and then execute. So similarly, in a static graph, first your model has to be built and it defined, and then it will start computation and start training process. Whereas in dynamic, at each layer they can make decision what to do the next. However, in TensorFlow, only the static graph was allowed, but in TensorFlow 2 version, Google has introduced eager execution, which is equivalent to providing the support like of dynamic graph. So in the initial days, the PyTorch become famous. There are many deep learning professionals who wants to buy the idea of dynamic graph because it provides lot of flexibility while the training and experimentation, whereas the static graph doesn't provide that much flexibility. So with eager execution in TensorFlow 2, TensorFlow also support dynamic graph. That's why it's also become more popular. This is the main difference between the TensorFlow and PyTorch. Because of the community support, different people take their sides whether to go with TensorFlow or with PyTorch. Both frameworks are heavily used in the industry and they provide a very good ecosystem to create your model, and even from data collection, once you have data pre-processing, feeding that data to the model, defining the different types of architectures for deep learning, and then they have some services for deploying the model on the cloud and for inferences. So both model are used, and you can pick one of the model, and then other model will be very easy to pick, because both are having the same concepts of tensors, which is the unit for computation. For learning these frameworks, you can go to the documentation of TensorFlow and PyTorch. They have detailed theory about TensorFlow and PyTorch with examples, and even video series is also available for PyTorch, and for TensorFlow as well you can find some of the video series. So please let me know what you are learning, whether you are going to use PyTorch or TensorFlow. It is up to you, but learn one framework thoroughly from the start to end. In that way you can master the other framework very easily. So if you like this video, please click on the like button, share with your friends, and subscribe to this channel. With this note, this is BK from Manikka signing off.